We studied in the previous classes regarding a disagreement between Beis Shammai and Beit Hillel. Beis Shammai considers the Yom Tov of Hanukkah, the one that we light the menorah, that we should first light 8 and then continue going downwards. And his proof of using that methodology is because of the bulls that were offered in the temple, in the Beit HaMikdash, during the festival of Sukkot. And they went down. The first day was 13, the second day was 12, and the last day was 7. Beit Hillel disagrees with Beit Shammai, and he says that you light one of the candles on the first night and the 8th on the 8th night. And he says because in aspects of holiness, you always climb, you always ascend, you never go down. And the question that the Rebbe asked, that we discussed last week, was, what is the connection, the comparison between the bulls that were offered on the festival of Sukkot and the festival of Hanukkah? You can say that they both contain 8 days, and 8 days, as we discussed at length last week, the number 8 is a reference to a transcendent level, that which climbs above the regular 7 days of the week, or the 7 layout of the Sephiros, the way God's energy comes into this world. But that in and of itself is the question. What is the connection between Hanukkah and Sukkot to that particular level which transcends the regular routine 7-day week? And we got a guest over here who'll make an appearance right now. Come say hello.
Who's there?
I don't know. We can't hear or see them.
Oh, really?
And also, why would there be 8 days when the menorah in the temple was actually one of 7, a candelabrum of 7 branches? We are now holding on page 26 in your copies, and here we'll begin another question about the connection between Hanukkah and Sukkot, and then there's another question on page 20. No, I'm sorry, the next page will be another question. So we're on page 26 right now in your copies. Another point that requires explanation. By the way, if anybody has any questions, you can type them. I can read the chats, but I can't hear you. So, okay. Another point that requires explanation: the Hanukkah lamps are being compared not to the holiday of Sukkot in general, but to the bulls of Sukkot specifically. The question is that when Beis Shammai wants to compare Hanukkah to Sukkot, he doesn't say those two are connected to one another because they have 8 days or for whatever reason. He just says, let's learn from the bulls of Sukkot, not to anything else, not to the festival itself, but to the bulls that are offered on the Sukkot. It would seem, however, that this comparison is somewhat strained, as the Hanukkah lamps relate to the temple menorah, since the Hanukkah lamps commemorate the miracle that occurred with the menorah lamps, while the bulls of Sukkot were offered, like all offerings, on the temple altar. In the layout of the temple, as an explanation, the layout of the temple, there were 3 sections. There were many more than 3 sections, but in the main part of the temple, there were 3 sections. The first section, the most important section, was all the way inside of a building, and that was where the Holy of Holies was housed. In the Holy of Holies was the Ark, and the Ark contained the tablets and the Sefer Torah, as the Torah described in yesterday's Torah portion. So the furniture in the Holy of Holies was but one aspect. It was the ark. This was a box that was made of gold, and then some wood, and then another layer of gold. It had two handles to it, two bars with which to transport the ark, and that was the ark in the Holy of Holies, into which the high priest entered only one day in the year on Yom Kippur. There was a wall and a curtain that divided the Holy of Holies to the next room that preceded the Holy of Holies. In that room is called the Holy, Kodesh. In that room, there were three pieces of furniture. There was the table upon which showbread, it's called showbread, some bread was placed once a week on Shabbos. They would remove the bread from the previous week and put a new stash of bread, 12 loaves, on this table. It also had an altar upon which they offered incense twice a day, once in the morning and once in the afternoon. It also had the menorah. The menorah had a little staircase in front of it, so you can get up to kindle the menorah, and that's the furniture in this room. Now, the building section of the temple ended here. Outside of this building, and down some steps, there was the altar upon which was offered the sacrifices. Next to the altar was a big basin from which the priests would wash their hands and their feet as instructed by the Torah before they began the process of doing the work in the temple. So the bulls were offered outside, if you will, of the actual building of the temple, whereas the menorah was inside the building in two different locations. I understand that they were all in the same complex, but within the complex, the menorah was in a different room. In fact, it was in the only room that was inside of the temple, whereas the altar was actually outdoors. It was open. It was in the courtyard. That's what he's saying here. Back to the text. The Hanukkah lamps commemorate the miracle that occurred with the menorah lamps, while the bulls of the Sukkot were offered like all offerings on the temple altar, two different places. Now the menorah, as we say here, now the menorah and altar are two different vessels. And if you look in footnote 18, it says furthermore, the location of the altar, the outer one, where the offerings were brought, is in front of the antechamber, outside the sanctuary, as I was just mentioning. That the altar was outside. The menorah, by contrast, was situated inside the sanctuary, as the Rambam says in his laws of Beit HaBechirah, the laws of the temple. Back to the text, where little number 18 is. The menorah and altar are two different vessels, especially as they are explained in Kabbalah and Hasidus. We will soon look at the at footnote number 19 about this. And the lamps and offerings are two different services. When lighting the menorah in the temple and offering the animals in the temple, two different services. So much so that yours, which is the lamps, is greater than theirs, the offerings, and will never cease. The text over here is referring to a very interesting discussion that is found towards the beginning of the book of Bamidbar, the book of Numbers. In the second portion of the book of Numbers, the Torah describes the inauguration and the great celebration of dedicating the Mishkan, the sanctuary, the traveling sanctuary in the desert. And the Torah describes how each tribe of 12 offered offerings to dedicate, to commemorate the beginning of the sanctuary. And they offered bulls, and they offered rams, and they offered this and that and the other. And the Torah repeats this 12 times. They offered the same thing. Each tribe offered the same thing, and it's repeated 12 times, one of the most extraordinary trouble with the Torah is how it repeats that, and there are certain laws that are hardly found at all in the Torah. Now is not the place for that. That's how the second Torah portion of the book of Bamidbar, the book of Numbers, concludes. The third Torah portion begins that God tells Moses to tell Aaron that when you light up, when you kindle the lamps, they should be kindled one opposite the other. Now the language of the Torah seems to be strange there regarding how Moses should tell Aaron. And the sages teach that what implicit in this whole story is a very interesting dialogue, because when Aaron saw that 12 tribes had been brought forward each day from the beginning of the month for 12 straight days, another tribe was celebrated, he felt very bad because his tribe, the Levite tribe, was not included in these festivities. So God tells Moses with these words of when you kindle the menorah, make sure that all of the candles, all of the branches, the flames of the branches face the middle stem. So what he was really saying was that don't feel bad because your service, which is the kindling of the menorah, is more dear, more precious than their offerings. This is what their reference to over here is. That yours, the lamps, is greater than theirs, the offerings. That Aaron's work in kindling the menorah on a daily basis, or anyone who was from the Kohen family, is actually greater than all of the sacrifices being offered by the other tribes. And the reason is because the offerings at one point would end. With the destruction of the temple, the offerings were finished. There were no more offerings until the temple would be rebuilt. So for almost 2,000 years, no one has offered an offering. Whereas the menorah continues to this day, because the Hanukkah celebration, we kindle a menorah in our homes every single Hanukkah, every night of Hanukkah. In fact, the festival of Hanukkah was established during the time of the Second Temple. So as soon as the temple was destroyed, there was a continuation of the kindling of the menorah. So God tells Aaron, don't feel bad that you were not, that your tribe was not part of the festivities, because your ongoing dedicated service to the temple is greater, because ultimately that will be perpetuated not by you, but by the Jewish people, and they'll never forget the menorah, whereas the sacrifices, some people may know about it, some people may not know about it, but today all Jews know about the menorah. It's a beautiful mitzvah, it's very easy. So, in other words, what the Rebbe is pointing out here is that the menorah and the sacrifices really don't have a connection to one another. So why would Beit Shammai, the school of Shammai, suggest that we light the menorah going downwards, beginning with 8 and going down to 7 and so on, by comparing it to how the sacrifices were offered, which also went downwards, when there's really no comparison between the sacrifices and the menorah. As he writes at the end, if you look at the brackets, what then, in the text, what then is the relationship between the Hanukkah lamps and the bowls of Sukkot? And now we're going to turn to footnote number 19. He's going to discuss here how the furniture in the temple actually reflected God's energy coming to this world in the system that we've been discussing at length over the last few months. So let's see inside footnote number 19, second paragraph. The Beit HaMikdash and its vessels. The primary purpose of the Beit HaMikdash, of the Holy Temple, is to facilitate the revelation of divinity within Israel, within the Jewish people. The purpose of the temple was to house God and have a place, a location, a home to which the Jewish people can come and visit God, if you will. The construction of the Beit HaMikdash must therefore mirror the order of Hishtalshelut. It mirrors the order of this chain reaction that we discussed last week, how God's energy begins somewhere and ends and concludes in another place, which is drawn forth from the divine essence in the creation of the world. The way God created the world was, as we discussed last week, in 7 days. The 7 days reflect the 7 ideas of godly energy coming to this world. So the temple, since this housed the godly energy in the world, also had to reflect these 7 levels. So let's see. The outer structure of the Beit HaMikdash reflects the Or Makif. The words Or Makif are 2 Hebrew words, which means the surrounding light, or the surrounding energy. Transcendent and imperceptible divine light. That means as follows. When God created this world, He creates this world with energy that each aspect, each element of this world is able to receive it, is able to house this godly energy that comes to this world. And so therefore, an ear of corn looks one way, a rock looks a different way, a cat looks a third way, a human being looks this way, and within human beings themselves, each one has a unique part of God that makes each person different and unique. That is the regular order of things. There is a higher transcendent level called the surrounding level. Not that it surrounds anything, but it's called surrounding because it doesn't quite enter in. This is the divine energy that is a transcendent energy, higher than this world, unlimited to a cat or an ear of corn, but it's a general, unlimited, unending, infinite level of godliness. The makif level, the surrounding level. Like something which surrounds, it doesn't quite get in. And this is an energy of God which we don't have, but we look for. We look to contact that. We look to tap into that energy. We look to become part of that energy. When we pray, when we study, when we do a mitzvah, we try to connect ourselves to that energy. Not the energy that we have already, but the energy that we don't have that can be accessible. So the outer structure of the temple represents the surrounding level. By the way, the sukkah is also called the makif. It's a very intense energy in the sukkah because it surrounds a person. It doesn't just surround the person, it also surrounds a person and even the dirt on the bottom of his or her shoes. Even the used chicken bones are part of this mitzvah. Okay, back in the text, 4 lines from the bottom of the page 26, footnote 19, while the vessels of the Beit HaMikdash, the vessels of the temple, reflect the Or Panimi, the inner energy, the inner light, the divine light that permeates the world. Thus, each of the Beit HaMikdash's vessels empirically demonstrate God's presence. That means because they represent the regular energy. A fire from heaven descended upon the altar. The showbread of the table remained warm all week long. The resting lamp of the menorah miraculously remained lit all night and day long, etc. This means that you had godliness within the temple. He says that a fire came from heaven onto the altar, which the Torah describes in the book of Leviticus in the 3rd portion. The showbread, that bread that we talked about before from the table, remained fresh and warm, as if you just took it out of the oven for a week, a clear, open miracle. And that the resting lamp of the menorah miraculously remained lit a whole night and all day. It didn't have enough oil, but every single day it was never extinguished. Before kindling the menorah, the priest would have to extinguish it, but naturally it never went out. Those were miracles to demonstrate that God was in that temple. Now, more specifically, each of the vessels correspond to a different aspect or a sephira of the Or Panimi, of the inner light. The vessels give us a demonstration of these 7 levels that we've been talking about. For example, the outer altar is Malchut, which descends into the lower worlds. The Malchut level is number 7, level number 7, and the word Malchut means royalty. Royalty, when you define royalty, you can say it's the boss, everybody looks up to royalty, and so on. But there's another element of royalty, which this term is borrowed from. The term of royalty means that's the end. That is the end of all, the highest level. It's also a level that no one tells royalty what to do. It's the other way around. Therefore, in human terms, this level of royalty refers to self-reflection and a completion of sorts. That means that when divine energy came to this world, it goes through all these channels. The final channel, the final destination, that's where godliness comes out to the world, because you've reached the destination. The altar, which dealt with such worldliness as animals, cattle and sheep and goats, and libations of oil and wine, and offerings also of meal, of flour offerings, that was a very physical, worldly place. In fact, it was outside, it wasn't even inside of the temple, as we mentioned before. So being connected to the world like that is a reference to the lowest level, the 7th level, the level of Malchut, the level of royalty, because that's where the final divine energy, the lowest level of divine energy was projected, the level of the altar. Let's look back inside. The inner altar, which was the altar upon which the spices were offered, the incense was offered, that's Tiferet. Tiferet means beauty. And beauty is the 3rd level, the level of compassion. The level of compassion is not kindness, which is the 1st level. Kindness just flows. It's not withholding, but withholding just withholds. But it's a combination of the two, which is compassion. We have compassion on the ones that need compassion, or that move our hearts. But that doesn't mean that we're flowing everywhere, we're just flowing towards those who require compassion. So it's a mixture of giving, but also withholding from other people. Now that's beauty, because beauty, real beauty, is only created when there's a combination of colors. A plain black canvas, painted black, is not very beautiful, even if one wants to think it's nice. But if you add some reds and some whites and some blues and some pinks, all of a sudden you've created a painting. A painting, which means a combination of colors, and you've turned it into something beautiful. Tiferes means beauty. And so the incense, which combined 11 different ingredients from all over the world, mind you, is the ultimate expression of beauty, because it's a combination of all different elements. There was cinnamon, and there was this and that and the other, all together creating this beautiful, perfect smell, aroma, pleasant aroma, and also combining all types of spices from around the world, including saffron, which is only available from the Far East, and so on and so forth. So the incense altar is represented by the 3rd level, which is beauty. The table, Gevura. The table is withholding. And the reason why the table represented withholding is because it had on it bread. You would think that giving bread would be giving, but it only had 12 loaves, and that was to be distributed to dozens of Kohanim, dozens of people. So it wasn't as flowing as you would want it to be. It's actually withholding. And then the next one is the menorah, chesed. The menorah is kindness, because of course it was a light. Light gives, light flows. The menorah is a lit candelabra. And the ark which includes the tablets and the Torah scroll written by Moses, is Keter, Chachma, and Bina. The crown, that's the surrounding level, the ark. Chachma, the wisdom. Bina, understanding. That's the Torah, which is logical. So now you've got the logic involved. You got Chesed, which is the menorah. You got kindness, which is the flow of the light coming from the menorah. You have Gevurah, withholding, which is the table. You have beauty, the third level of compassion, which is the altar, the frankincense altar, and then you missed out a few here, but there's more vessels, but he's not going through all of them, and then the outside altar, which is the ultimate final destination. So you see from here that the temple itself reflected the divine transmission of energy. It reflected it even in its furniture. That was the purpose of the temple. And so he wants to know if the menorah represents flow and the altar outside represents the end level, what is the connection between them? Okay, we're going to turn to page number 28 with one more question on this whole idea. We must also understand why its mitzvah, that of the Hanukkah lamp, is from when the sun sets. That menorah must be lit after sunset. Just like the Shabbos candles must be lit before the sun sets, because you've got to light it before Shabbos starts when it's forbidden to light a fire on Shabbos. The menorah's purpose is to light up the darkness, and therefore it has to be lit after sunset. The anomaly here is well known. The Beit HaMikdash lamps were kindled from Plag HaMincha. Plag HaMincha is a terminology for time on the day, on the daily run of time, which is an hour and a quarter before sunset. I'm not going to get into the whole thing now, how the day works according to Jewish law, but there's all kinds of parts of the day. There's when the day begins, and there's midday, and then there's the sunset, and between midday and the sunset is a 6-hour period. If the day begins at 6 and ends at 6, if you just give the day 12 hours. And halfway through that, and then an extra half hour for reasons that are way beyond this discussion right now, is 2.5 hours left of the day. And then if you divide that 2.5 hours, you are left with 1 hour and 15 minutes, 1 hour and a quarter before sunset. Divide that time, last 2.5 hours of the day, you divide that into half, and that's called Plag HaMincha. The word Plag means to divide or separate. HaMincha is the time of Mincha. Mincha is like the afternoon time. So we divide the afternoon time, the later afternoon time, the last 2.5 hours is divided into half. What's the significance of that time? Anything that is supposed to start at nighttime most things can begin at the Plag HaMincha time. For example, if candle lighting this past Friday was at 7:41, that means that 7:41 was 18 minutes before sunset. There is an 18-minute buffer all across the world except for Jerusalem, where they have a 40-minute buffer. There's an 18-minute buffer from the candle lighting time until sunset. You can always time yourself. If you look at the candle lighting time, it's 18 minutes past that is sunset. When the sun sets on Friday, Shabbos will begin. That's when nighttime begins. Now, we do wait till nightfall, but we're not quite sure if the sunset means the end of the day or nightfall means the end of the previous day when there's no more light. So since we don't know, we begin Shabbos always at sunset, and we conclude Shabbos at nightfall. Now, if 7:41 was too late for me, I would have a choice to light the Shabbos candles 1 hour and 15 minutes before 7:41, or plug ha-mincha, the half time of the mincha. I can go back an hour and a half. So instead of lighting at 7:41, I'm lighting about 6:10. It doesn't work according to a 16-minute hour, but it works according to taking the day and giving it 12 hours and just dividing it equally into 12 parts. So each part can have 60 minutes, which would be a 12-hour day, or can have 70 minutes, or it can have 50 minutes, depending on the summer or the winter. So plug ha-mincha, halfway through mincha, you can light your Shabbos candles, and that would be considered, you're lighting it for Shabbos. If you lit your candles 5 minutes before plug ha-mincha, it's as though you're lighting your Shabbos candles on Monday afternoon. It has no significance to Shabbos. You got to wait to this plug ha-mincha time in order for the Shabbos to begin. And that's how it works with many, many different things. You prefer to wait till nighttime, but in several occasions. But if really in dire need, one can go all the way back to an hour and 15 minutes before sunset. Let's look back inside, and this will all be explained in footnote number 23. Okay, so the Beit HaMikdash lamps were kindled from plug ha-mincha, an hour and a quarter before sunset. If the Hanukkah lamps were established because of the miracle that involved the Beit HaMikdash lamps, in other words, the miracle that involved the menorah in the temple, as previously noted, and especially since everything that the sages established, they established it similar to the biblical. We didn't want to go too far off from biblical stuff, and Hanukkah is a sages' celebration. It would seem appropriate that the kindling time would be that same time as that of the Beit HaMikdash lamps, that we would light the menorah when plug ha-mincha comes, an hour and 15 minutes before the sun sets. Why then is its mitzvah specifically from when the sun sets? You have to light the menorah after sunset. Why are there such differences between the menorah in the temple to the menorah that we kindle for Hanukkah, which commemorates the menorah in the temple? Now let's look at footnote number 23, and that explains the plug ha-mincha. I went through it already, but now it'll be easier to understand footnote number 3. Plug ha-mincha. Many observances in Jewish law are performed at specific times during the day. The daily prayers, for example, can be recited only at certain times. Shabbat and the festivals are likewise time-specific. The calculation of these halachic times, known as zamanim, which is Hebrew for times, depends on the various astronomical phenomena of the day for the specific locale, which means, as it continues, sunrise, sunset, the amount of time between them, and the sun's angular position before rising are all factors that determine the halachic times and hours. He puts it in quotes because they're not necessarily 60-minute hours, but they are just, it's a borrowed term for a day that's just divided into 12, and that's how you calculate the hours of the day. The hour has special meaning in Jewish law. When we say that a certain mitzvah may be performed 3 hours into the day, which is, by the way, the mitzvah of Shema, the daily recitation of Shema must be completed by 3 hours into the day. So when we say 3 hours, this does not mean 3 in the morning or 3 clock hours after sunrise. Rather, an hour in Jewish law means 1/12 of the daylight hours. In the summers can be up to 75 minutes, and in the winter it can be as little as 45 minutes. Thus, if the sun rises at 5 a.m. and sets at 7:30 p.m., one proportional hour, sha'az manit in Hebrew, the hour which it's a borrowed term, will be 72.5 minutes, and all calculations will use that number. 72.5 times 12 equals your time of how many minutes you have in a day. To understand the concept of plug ha-mincha discussed in our discourse, it is necessary to introduce 2 other zamanim, 2 other times. These are mincha ketana, which is the earliest time to pray the afternoon service, and Shkia or sunset, the latest time for the afternoon service. Mincha Ketana is 9.5 proportional hours after sunrise, while Shkia is 12 proportional hours after sunrise. As I said before, 2.5 hours before the end of the day. As there are 12 proportional hours of daylight. Plaga Mincha, the last 8 of the day, is halfway between the times of Mincha Ketana and Shkia, or halfway between 9.5 and 12 proportional hours. Thus, Plaga Mincha is 10 3/4 proportional hours into the day, or 1 1/4 proportional hours before the end of the day sunset. It is halachically permitted to pray the evening service and accept the Shabbat anytime after Plaga Mincha, and it was at Plaga Mincha that the menorah of the Beit HaMikdash was kindled. Okay, so in summary here, the question is asked, and it's reinforced over several different elements. Why would there be a connection between Hanukkah, which is 8 days, and Sukkot, which is also 8 days? What is the connection between them? And if you think deeply into it, there seems to be a disconnect between them, because they both talk about different places in the temple, commemorating different vessels in the temple, and they also are lit at different times as well. You light the menorah in the temple by Plag HaMilcha, or an hour and 15-minute proportional hours before the end of the day, and the menorah of the Hanukkah must be lit after the sunset. So this further distances, it would seem, the connection, the comparison between the two. I'm going to stop recording here.